Hey everyone, welcome to Biblical. What if everything we thought about the beginning of time was only part of the story? What if something happened before Eden, before Adam and Eve, before the fall, before the serpent? A war, not on earth but in the heavenly places. A conflict older than the garden, older than the universe, older than time itself. A war that split the spiritual world and changed everything. Most of us have heard the Genesis story. God created the heavens and the earth. He made man in his image. There was a garden, a tree, a serpent, and a fall. That's the story we're taught. That's the story we've memorized. But the early Christians, some of them, at least, believed there was something else behind the curtain. A hidden war, a secret beginning, a cosmic betrayal. And these weren't crazy ideas. They were preserved in ancient texts buried for nearly 2,000 years. Texts the early church tried to silence. Gnostic texts. Now, before we continue, let's be clear. This video is not about rejecting the Bible or the Christian faith. In fact, it's the opposite. It's about diving deeper into what early followers of Jesus wrestled with. It's about asking the hard questions. It's about seeking the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. So what is this Gnostic war we're talking about? In short, some early Christians, especially those who followed Gnostic thought, believed that before our world was created, before Eden, there was a spiritual rebellion. Not just Satan rebelling against God, but a deeper rupture, a war in the divine realm itself. In the Gnostic view, the true, original God was pure light, beyond all material things. Not a God of rules or punishments, not even the God who created the physical universe. This original God was so pure and so perfect that no words could describe him. From this, God emanated beings called eons, spiritual entities that made up a divine fullness, what the Gnostics called the pleroma. One of these aeons, Sophia, whose name means wisdom, desired to create something of her own, but instead of asking permission, she acted alone. And in doing so, something went wrong. Sophia gave birth to a flawed being, a being who was blind to the fullness from which he came. This being was called Yaldabaoth, and he believed he was the only God in existence. Sound familiar? The Gnostics believed Yaldabaoth was the one who created the physical world, the world of suffering, injustice, decay, and death. In other words, they believed the creator of the physical universe wasn't the ultimate God, but a lower, ignorant being who thought he was supreme. Now, before you panic and think this is blasphemy, consider this. The Gnostics were not atheists. They weren't pagans. Many of them considered themselves followers of Christ. They read the Gospels. They honored Jesus. But they believed Jesus came to reveal the truth about this cosmic deception, to wake people up. Let's pause and ask a question. Why is there suffering in the world? If God is perfectly good and loving, why is there cancer? Why is there war? Why do babies die? Why are innocent people abused, starved, enslaved? Christians have wrestled with this question for centuries. It's called the problem of evil. Some answer by saying we live in a fallen world, that everything was good until Adam and Eve disobeyed, that death and pain entered because of sin. But the Gnostics flipped this view upside down. They believed the world was broken from the beginning, not because humans sinned, but because the one who made the world was flawed himself. He created a world of suffering because he was ignorant of the true God, the God of light, love, and spirit. In Gnostic texts like the Apocryphon of John or the Gospel of Judas, we see this storyline. The creator God, Yaldabaoth, creates the world and places humans in it. He traps them in bodies of flesh. He wants to be worshipped. He gives laws. He punishes. He's jealous. Sound familiar? Now look at how God is described in parts of the Old Testament. In Exodus, he says, I am a jealous God. In Job, he allows Satan to torment an innocent man. In Genesis, he walks in the garden, as if he has a physical form. To the Gnostics, this wasn't the true God, but a pretender, a lesser God masquerading as the Almighty. Again, this wasn't atheism. It was a reinterpretation, a way of explaining the deep contradictions they saw in Scripture and in life. But where does Jesus fit into all of this? To the Gnostics, Jesus was the ultimate messenger, the one sent from the true God beyond all worlds. He came not to die as a blood sacrifice to appease an angry God, but to awaken the divine spark inside each human soul. He came to remind us who we really are, not slaves, but children of light. And that's where the war comes in. Yaldabaoth and his archons, spiritual rulers, keep humanity in ignorance. They blind us with false religions, empty rituals, rigid laws, and fear-based control. They feed on our confusion, but Christ breaks through that system. He teaches secret truths. He sets the captives free. Think of this as a cosmic jailbreak. Now you might be wondering, if this is true, why don't we hear about it in churches? Why was this version of the story silenced? That brings us to history. In the early centuries of Christianity, there wasn't one version of the faith. There were dozens of movements, each with different gospels, different teachings, different views of God and Jesus. Some saw Christ as divine, others as human. Some emphasized faith, others knowledge. The Gnostics were just one of these groups, but they were growing fast. By the 2nd and 3rd centuries, church leaders like Irenaeus and Tertullian began cracking down. They labeled the Gnostics heretics. They burned their texts. They erased them from memory. And they succeeded, for a time. Until 1945. That's when a farmer in Egypt stumbled upon a sealed jar near the town of Nag Hammadi. Inside were ancient scrolls, Gnostic scriptures lost for over 1,600 years. Among them were texts like the Gospel of Thomas, the Secret Book of John, and the Gospel of Truth. These writings gave us a window into the earliest and most controversial Christian ideas. And suddenly, the Gnostic War wasn't just a myth. It was a forgotten history. Now let's talk real life. You've probably felt it. That sense that something is wrong with the world. That the system we live in isn't how things are supposed to be. That maybe we've been lied to, manipulated, distracted, chained. That's what the Gnostics were trying to explain. This world is a trap, but the trap is not the end of the story. The soul is eternal. There is a greater God, a greater truth. And Christ came not just to save us from sin, but to awaken us to that reality. Let me ask you a question. What if you've always had a spark of the divine inside you? What if the real war is not between nations or people or politics, but between truth and ignorance, spirit and flesh, light and blindness? What if the story of Eden was only the beginning of the story, but not the beginning of reality? The Gnostic War, if it happened, didn't take place on a battlefield with swords or bombs. It was a war of light against shadow, wisdom against arrogance, knowledge against deception. And in many ways, it's still happening. Every time we seek truth, every time we question what we're told, every time we choose love over fear, we're taking part in that ancient war. And maybe that's what faith really is, not blind belief, but the courage to see what others won't. So what really happened before Eden? We may never know for certain, but maybe, just maybe, the war before time was never about who gets to rule, but who gets to wake up. And that's a war worth fighting.